This is 7th grade lesson 4.1. In this activity or this lesson, students will use the percent equation to solve 3 different types of percentage problems. The standards covered in this lesson are 7RP3 and 7EE3. The page numbers out of the hardcover book are pages 158 through 163 and pages 89 through 92 out of the practice journal. Today we're going to be working with reviewing how to find a percent from fractions. So this is something that you have learned in the past. So this was when you first were introduced to working with fractions and solving for percentages. They would always give you a visual representation of that fraction. So here, each of these larger boxes is made up of 100 little smaller boxes. So in the first example, it's showing us that there are 7 columns colored in and each column has 10 blocks. So that gave us 70 blocks out of 100 that were colored in. Well, when you go through and you change a fraction to a percent, as long as the number on the bottom is 100, then you can just write the top number as your percentage. Now, as we start working through these, we're not always going to have 100 as our bottom number. So the other method that you can use is you can always take your top number divided by your bottom number. And I know here we wouldn't really need to do that because it's just going to move our decimal and make it a 0.7, and then we would have to go through and move that over 2 places to become our 70%. Okay, but this only works, that process of over 100 and getting to use the top number only works when you have 100 as your bottom number. Okay, so we do have to understand the other process. So in our example 2, we have 45 out of 100 that were colored in, and that was 45%. The key thing to remember is with the percentage sign, if you look at it, it actually has 1 line and 2 circles, which is the same as 100. So notice how that 45 could be written over 100. Our percent sign kind of creates the number 100. So that's something that can maybe help you remember if you have to go from a fraction to, not a fraction, but a percent to a fraction, it's always going to be that number over 100, no matter what you're working with, unless it's decimal numbers, then we have to kind of think a little bit different of a method. Okay, the other thing that you can also remember is as we're working through these, if I were to divide this out, I would get 0.45. Okay, if I wanted to change 0.5 to its percentage form, remember a percent has 2 circles, right? So those 2 circles tell me how many places I have to move my decimal towards where I would put a percent sign, which is behind. So 2 places, 1, 2. My percent sign sits back here, so that's the same as 45%. And we'll be working with that concept quite a bit today. Right now, I'm just reviewing over every time if you had 100 as your bottom number or your denominator. So I want you to go through, pause your video, work through and write out your fractions as well as your percentages for each of these 3 that you have. So pause your video and then check back in just a minute to see to check your final answers. Okay, and take note that on each of these, I did work through on reducing the fractions. So once again, sometimes you can create fractions that'll have that 100 on the bottom, and sometimes it's not easy to do that. So we do have to understand the other method of taking your top number divided by your bottom number, which is the method that we'll be working with today. Okay, so today there's 2 important things that you need to understand with the word problems that we're going to be using. And that is understanding that the word is in math, most of the time, is going to mean equals. So example, if I were to say 7 plus 3 is, you would say 10. Well, you know that that means equals. I'm going to go ahead and add them together and tell her what the equal or what the sum of those 2 numbers is. Okay, in math, the word of can be substituted in most of the time with a multiplication x. Okay, so at the top of the screen, I was just kind of reviewing over the concepts that I covered on the previous screen. So once again, if I had 4%, that percent sign has our 1. You'll notice here in the black, and then our 2 circles to create over 100. This could then be reduced to 1 over 25 if I had to reduce it down. Okay, So we're going to go ahead and work with these two word concepts today. Okay, so solving for a percent of a number, or the opposite where they might want us to solve for the whole part. So it says when solving an equation that involves a percent, you must convert that percent to its decimal or its fraction form first. Now, if you wanted to work off of its fraction form, that's okay. You will be allowed to use a calculator when you're working through these. Even on the Iowa assessment part of this test, I believe is on the portion where you can use your calculator, okay? And we're being realistic. If I wanted to do this in the real world, I would pull my calculator out and use it, unless it was like a really easy percentage to kind of calculate in my head. So here I've got what number. So wherever I see the word what, whether it's what number, what percent, what fraction, when I see the word what, that's telling me that's the part that I don't know. So the part that we don't know in math is the variable. So I'm going to put a letter. So I'm going to just use W. In math, we said is means equals. 24%, when we do this, we need to change it either to its decimal or its fraction form. Now, I like to work its decimal form because with fractions, you have to remember all of those different rules. It's not easy to do fractions on your calculator. So we'll go ahead and change this to its decimal form. Plus, that's good practice. Understanding that I have 2 circles on my percent, and I want to move 2 away from that percent sign because I want to get it from being away from being a percent. So 2 circles means 2 places, it becomes 0.24. In math, of means times, and then 50. Okay, so I have W, just to write these closer together, equals 0.24 times 50. Now we have to work it as a one-step equation. So I need to make sure that on my one side of the equal sign, W is by itself. So I get to do exactly what it says. I'm going to do 0.24 times 50. So I'm going to pull my calculator out, do 0.24 times 50, and when I do that, it gives me 12. So I just found out that what number, or 12, is 24% of 50. Okay, so that's working. As I assess you on this portion of the chapter, I will expect you to write the equation, so you have to get comfortable. I know some of you, there's not a whole lot of you, but some of you will be able to solve these. You're understanding the problem, just reading through it. You'll be able to solve and answer what 12 is. Maybe you know that you're going to divide or you're going to multiply or whatever. I still want to see your equations. I'm also going to be assessing you on can you write the equation from the word format. So make sure that you are practicing that even if you understood how to solve this without the equation that I had you write, okay? Then when you're going ahead and taking your own assessment on STAR and Iowa assessment, then you can choose for yourself. But for right now, I want you to practice using that concept. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve another one. So here we have what number is 150% of 40. So once again, here's my what number. So I don't know, I'm going to put a letter. Is means equals 150%. Remember, we have to move 2 places away. Only 2, there's only 2 circles on that percent sign. So 2 places away would make this 1.50 or just 1.5. Of means times 40. So once again, check to make sure where your letter is, and here's our equal sign. The W is by itself. So I can go ahead and do 1.5 times 40, and that gives me 60. So I just found out that W equals 60. So 60 is 150% of 40. Okay, so here's our next one. What number is 10% of 20? So I want you to go through, write out your equation, solve for your letter. Okay, so go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this equation. Okay, so for your equation, you should have ended up with W or whatever letter you chose equals 0.1 times 20. And when you solve that, you should have gotten your W or your number equals 2. So here 2 is 10% of 20. One thing that I will say is if you didn't have that, double check your percentage. Did you remember to write it out in its decimal form or to punch it in on your calculator in its decimal form? If you're working the fraction, that's okay. Just remember that as you work in the fraction form, that you have to create that 20 also into a fraction, okay? Okay, so now we're gonna work with some of them where they're wanting us to find the larger number. Okay, so here, it's still the same format. We're still gonna go ahead and substitute in. So I've got 48 means equals 75%. So once again, change that to its decimal form, which is 0.75, because we only get to move 2 places. Of means times what number? There's my letter. Okay, so now the thing that's different about this one is I have to now pay attention to the fact that there's my equal sign and W is not by itself on one side of the equal sign. It doesn't have to be on the left side, but it does have to be by itself. So in order to get W by itself, we're jumping back to stuff that we learned back in chapter 1. Okay, and that's where we isolated and worked to solve for a variable. So right now it's times 0.75, so we're gonna divide by 0.75 to get it away from the W. So now W is by itself, but whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Okay, so now I can go ahead and do 48 divided by 0.75. And when I do that, I get 64. So I just found out that W is 64. So 48 is 75% of 64. Okay, and if we're working through this, if 48 is only 75% of a number, then we know that the number should be bigger than 48. Okay, because this percent was only part of that whole. Okay, let's try another one together. So 90 is 18% of what number? So 90 equals 18%, so 0.18 of times what number? Okay, there's my equal sign again. So I don't have to remember anything other than I have to understand that W has to be by itself. So right now it's times 0.18, so I'm going to divide by 0.18. Okay, so now I've got W by itself here, divide by 0.18. So 90 divided by 0.18 gives me 500. Okay, so 90 is 18% of 500. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and slide one out and have you guys try that one. Whoops. Okay, go ahead. Whoops, that's the wrong one because that's the same one we just did. Go ahead and try this one. So we have 39 is 52% of what number? So you're going to go ahead and write your equation and then solve for that equation. You can pause your video and then check yourself in just a minute. You should have gotten 75 for this answer. Okay, so once again, making sure that you're writing up that equation so that I can check to make sure that you're understanding how to substitute in for is and of, and check again to see if you can solve for a variable. So make sure that you're writing up those equations. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move on to one other type of problem, and that's when they give us a problem where we're actually finding the percent. So in the first two, we found part of a number. In the next one, we found the whole number, or what we should have started with. And in this situation, they're leaving the percentage out. So we're still going to use those same steps. It's just that now they're asking for the percent. Okay, so the one thing that's going to change is instead of moving our decimal ahead of time, because we had the percent before, we're going to have to do that after we get our answer. Okay, so we're still going to write down our equation the way that we did. So 9.5 still means equals what percent. Now, when I get where it says what percent, I use the letter P because it's visual for me to remember I have one step to do at the end because it's asking for P, the percent. Okay, of means times 25. Okay, here's my equal sign. I have the letter P times 25 on one side, and I just need the letter P. So I'm going to divide by 25. To get rid of it, divide by 25. So now when I punch this in on my calculator, I punch it in the way I see it, top divided by bottom. So 9.5 divided by 25. When I do that, this is what I get. P equals 0.38. Now I have to remember it did ask what percent. So I need to change that 0.38 to a percent. Remember, a percent sign goes on the right side and it has two circles on it. So I'm going to move 2 places to where I would put a percent sign. So my final answer is 38%, not 0.38. Okay, so make sure that you're remembering to put it in that final format of the percent. Okay, so let's try another one of those. Whoops. Okay, so 15 is what percent of 40? 15 is what percent, so I'm going to put the letter P, of times 40. Okay, so we've got the letter P times 40 on one side, so we want to divide by 40. Divide by 40. So now we punch it on our calculator the way we see it, 15 divided by 40. And when we do that, this is what I get. P equals 0.375. So remember, a percent sign has 2 circles, right? Only 2 circles on it. I only get to move 2 places towards where I would put it. 1, 2. So my final answer is 37.5%. Now, unless they ask you to round it, leave it as its decimal number. If you, for me, had rounded it to 38%, I would accept that. But realize that if you're doing a standardized test, they may only give 37.5 as the correct answer option. So make sure that you're paying attention. Maybe look at those answer options and see, do any of them have a decimal before I go through and change it to a 38%, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and have you try one of these now on your own. So remember, it's the same steps that you've done. It's just that now you're gonna change that decimal answer to its percent form. So go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this one. Remember to give your answer in its percent form. Okay, so this one was kind of tricky because it was a pretty small number. So when you went through and you solved it and you got 0.005, remember, you still only moved 2 places. So it doesn't become 5%, but it becomes 0.5%. Okay, so that's working with percentage. The key thing in this lesson, make sure that you understand the word is means equals and the word of means to multiply. The other step that you have to remember, if you are working with a percentage, remember to change it to its decimal form before working and multiplying with it. And if it asks for the percent, remember to move your decimal 2 places and only 2 because a percent sign has 2 circles. And you move it to the right because a percent sign is on the right side of the number. Good luck with this lesson.